None of you cowards can touch me!
An insurrection leader screams at the top of his lungs while shooting a heavy machine gun down the hallway. With this being the only way to get to him aside from leveling the entire building, the Marines and ODSTs trying to capture him alive have no choice but to remain behind cover. There was no reason to throw more bodies at the operation. Orders had finally come through. The message had simply said, "Hold position. Do not engage. Stand by." The combined squad of ODSTs and Marines following the terrorists were puzzled. Last they had checked, they still had several objectives left, but now all ground assets had been secured. All except of course one, the lunatic screaming down the hall, the insurrection leader. He felt very secure in his ability to hold down the hallway until reinforcements could arrive. What he didn't know was that said reinforcements no longer walked the mortal plane. He believed the only way the UNSC would root him out would be by launching a missile capable of leveling the entire building. He was wrong. They had sent something much worse.
If the UNSC wants me dead, they'll have to send the Grim Reaper itself.
That's why I'm here.
Spartan B312 knocks the weapon out from the rebel's hand. The smack is so hard it forces the insurrectionist to spin on his heels. B312 takes out his knife and delivers a very precise blow to the rebel's back, severing his spinal column from the base of his skull. A single drop of blood drips down the handle of the 12-inch knife. The battle was over before it even started. B312 contacts HICOM.
Target acquired, all other assets secured, and hostiles eliminated.
Once on the ground, a Pelican arrives to pick up the Spartan and his target. After leaving Memoria, this is where the shift in the timeline happens. While originally this mission impresses Colonel Holland enough, he assigns B312 to Noble Team. This time around, the insurgent surviving means the Spartan transports him to an Oni Black site, where he is coerced into giving up information about major insurgent players. One such being an arms dealer, currently on this sector, Stefan Sensky, most commonly known as the disgruntled father of Spartan 010, Naomi. Oni, knowing of Sensky's intentions for years, does not pass up the opportunity to send their assassin in. B312 is tasked with heading into Venezia in the Orso system and executing the arms dealer before he reaches the planet, as the entire planet was under insurgent control, after which he's to report to Reach for a new assignment, designated Noble. This mission commences on May 14th, when B312 takes a dumb AI to pilot a small prowler deep into enemy space. His execution mission would not be done until August 16th, 2 days after the fleet sent by the Ministry of Resolution had arrived on Reach, at which point he has returned to human space, but it's too late to join Noble Team. His new mission now is handed down by Admiral Perengoski herself. Return to Reach, infiltrate the Fleetmaster's ship with the aid of the Spartan IIs, execute the Fleetmaster and gain control of the vessel. If intel provided by one of their lesser assets, Jameson Locke, is to be believed, the fleet will be commanded by Thel Vadami. The full report of this Fleetmaster is yet to be completed, but at this point, Locke's report has been skimmed through, and it seems all evidence does point to Thel Vadami being the biggest threat to humanity's fleets. After the assassination of the Fleetmaster, he will be briefed on Operation Red Flag, which he will now be designated to be part in. B312 nods and takes his small but stealthy vessel to Reach. Things happen quite differently on Reach starting on July 24th, when Noble 6 usually arrives to be introduced to and take part of the team. This time around, however, Noble Team is sent to Visegrad as a 5-man squad. With one less Spartan, this mission goes by slightly slower, meaning by the time they arrive at the relay station where they contact Colonel Holland and declare winter contingency, it's a bit later than usual. None of it matters though, as the events on Oni base happen just the same, as well as the reconnaissance mission between Noble 3 and this time around being Noble 4. I hate to sound like a broken record, but none of this changes. They launched the assault on the Spire, destroying it, and used the Mach gun round to bring it down. Right after the Grafton is glassed by the supercarrier, the Long Night of Solace. Now is when we see the small time delays begin to pile up. Cat's plan hinging on the Saber program is at fault, because they don't know how to fly the Sabers. They will have to spend some time learning. Not much, but just enough. This ultimately saves them, however. As they're preparing to launch, they get word of the absolutely massive fleet that has arrived on Reach. The mission is scrapped and Noble Team is redeployed to protect Reach. Many events on Reach happen the same, such as the siege of New Alexandria and city after city. But as far as Noble Team is concerned, their individual circumstances are vastly different. No longer scattered, Noble Team is on New Alexandria for the final moments of the city's existence. Due to not having Noble 6 here, an ace pilot, their mission to evacuate and destroy all around New Alexandria runs into more hiccups. The ODST known as Edward Buck requests help, which would eventually lead to him escaping and surviving the fall of Reach. Without that extra help this time around though, Edward Buck perishes on Reach when it gets glassed. Circumstances are not all entirely bleak, however. As the glassing began to take place, Noble Team was entirely in a different location, one where the elite who kills Kat cannot get to them. Her death is narrowly evaded, but the city being glassed means they need a lift and eventually end up at Sword Base again. Noble Team pushed through Sword Base to reach Catherine Halsey, whom this time around gives Cortana to George. Her intention, without telling Noble Team, is to have George inadvertently join Master Chief on the Pillar of Autumn by guilt-tripping him about the other Spartan 2s being deployed on Reach, protecting the orbital defenses, and not having been able to join Chief on their mission. And if Noble Team survives, getting Cortana to the Autumn, have them regroup with the rest of the Spartans. The entombing of Sword Base happens just as June goes with Catherine, and Noble 1, 2, 4, and 5 take the Cortana fragment to Assad. The mission changes quite a lot here, with George carrying Cortana, Emil and Kat escorting him. He considers over and over handing the package off to Kat or Emil, but his mission directive was very clear. When they come up against the Scarab, Carter sacrifices himself once more to buy them passage, which is something that doesn't sit right with him at all. This allows the 3 remaining members of Noble to get to Azad, where George finally disobeys orders, while he and Emil protect the Mac gun and use it to obliterate phantoms, banshees, and spirits. Kat hands the package off to Captain Keyes. The Pelican is interrupted by the Phantom coming to drop off the zealots that take out Emil. When the elites land on top of the Mac gun, George fights them off. He kills the elites before they can reach Emil, but is stabbed through the abdomen with a mortal blow. With this being the case, he decides to stay behind on the Mac gun and buy them as much time as they need to get off world. Emil and George share a moment where their bond is at full display. George grabs his tags, rips them off.
You better get going.
Give them hell, big man.
He presses his head against Emil's helmet, with blood dripping down his mouth, and lets go. The Pelican picks up Kat and Emil. While they proceed to escape, George is about to fall asleep, pass out from blood loss, when he sees a small prowler in the distance coming down on fire. He hears on his radio,
This is Spartan B312. My prowler is under attack. Whoever's on that Mac gun, assistance would be appreciated.
George tightens his grip around the controls once more and aims at the phantoms chasing down the prowler. Before he takes his last breath, he shoots down the phantoms, saving the lonesome ship. Spartan B312 flies past Azad and heads back the way the Spartans came from, to Castle Base. His only intel being this is where Halsey had sent out her last transmission from. The Spartan ultimately still ends up crashing his prowler. As he gets closer, more banshees and phantoms attack him, but he follows the Cole protocol and makes sure they can't take either ship nor AI. He wonders if he will even be able to get to the Fleet Master seeing the state of Reach. Without him being part of Noble Team, the Long Night of Solace was never destroyed, and that was just so much more firepower the UNSC had to deal against. He got a glimpse of it, and though that may be the capital ship Oni was referring to, he has no way to verify it. B312 fights through an army of forces between Azad and Castle Base, arriving on September 7th. The Covenant, still trying to get into Castle Base even after it was buried, indicates this place must be important. He doesn't know what they're looking for, but he guesses this has to be the safest bet considering how much manpower the Covenant is throwing their way. He ambushes the forces trying to get to Red Team, Halsey, and Vice Admiral Whitcomb. While coming up from behind the Covenant, he manages to catch them off guard and inadvertently, but gladly, saves the rest of the Spartans. Most specifically, Spartans Vin 030 and Isaac 039. Well, just barely in Vin's case, as he's greatly injured. Half of his face is melted off. With this new combatant and extra surviving Spartans, they decide to launch an attack against the Long Night of Solace. While Halsey begins to work on her secret weapon, something she kept hidden on their Oni base. Vice Admiral Whitcomb is extremely furious she didn't follow the Cole protocol and made sure the AI was deleted, but Halsey argues that once Reach was discovered, Earth would be too, and this AI may be their only way out. Spartan Fred 104 is to stay behind and prepare for surgery, as without Master Chief around, they have no one else capable of housing an AI. Back on the Pillar of Autumn, Kat, Emil, and Chief are all woken from cryo when the Pillar of Autumn comes under attack. A few things happen very similarly to my What If Noble Team Survive Reach timeline. Shameless plug right over there. Kat hijacking a Banshee, Emil tearing through the hallways with a shotgun. But since it's just the two members of Noble Team this time around, they go down with the captain. In fact, Kat, being the leader of Noble now, even though there's only two, will go down with Captain Keyes, and Emil will go with Major Silva. Kat manages to kill the elite that tracks down Captain Keyes and keeps him from getting captured. Thus, once they land on the ring, they almost immediately establish Firebase Alpha. With Kat staying by the captain's side, Chief and Emil being tasked with rescuing the other humans who were captured on board the Truth and Reconciliation. Emil and Chief are working together very well. It feels almost natural. Chief isn't given orders as he sees how efficient Emil is on his own. Emil likes that although Chief is basically his superior, he isn't giving out orders. Emil was used to being a headhunter, so he's used to being alone, but also having been part of Noble Team recently means he's fallen into a routine of having someone watch his back. After rescuing the Marines and escaping once more on board a borrowed Spirit, they regroup with Alpha Base, who has been preparing to launch an assault on the supposed weapons cache. Having had plenty time to prepare this time around, Chief will assault the beach as regular, except Noble Team will remain with Captain Keyes and Johnson to get to the weapons cache. Since they were ready sooner and got there faster, they have just arrived in the middle of the initial flood outbreak, before the Covenant managed to seal them back up. Even though we know some flood escaped and got out already, they end up having to confront the Covenant that's trying to keep them out. But they don't know it's to stop the spread. When they get to the door to brute force their way in, it's Kat who is about to open it when Emil grabs her prosthetic arm by the wrist and stops her.
Watch it.
Hush up. You hear that? Doesn't sound like Covenant.
Captain Keyes, I advise we retreat right now.
Keyes ignores their advice, but says it's duly noted. They need to get in there. Whatever might be scaring the Covenant, they'll need. Kat looks at Emil and nods. He prepares his shotgun as the doors open. When they go in, we know what happens. The flood ambush them and start hopping on top of their victims. But Kat and Emil being there means they manage to keep Captain Keyes uninfected, as well as kill several flood forms before they are done mutating. Captain Keyes regrets not listening to their advice, but decides they need to flee. With about half of their forces making it out alive this time around, the flood does not get Captain Keyes. They also failed to gain much biomass out of this endeavor. Keyes returns to Alpha Base, where they rally momentarily, only to find out the flood are coming after them. At this point, Chief has reached the control room and Cortana told him to run and get to the captain. But once he got out of there, he made contact with Keyes at Alpha Base. Instead of leaving Cortana for 12 hours, he only left her for a short while and makes it back to her within an hour after leaving. She gets less data from the rings and the Forerunners, but she gets everything important at the very least. Making his way back to Alpha Base, he first encounters the flood. And after fighting through some of them, the monitor takes him through the teleportation, just like in the original, to the library. But it was right before he could reach Alpha Base. So now Kat and Emil have to keep Johnson and Keyes alive amongst the dwindling Marine forces. Since they see Chief's signal suddenly disappear, they end up assuming he's dead, along with his suit and Cortana. It gives them less option. Keyes comes up with a plan to blow up the Pillar of Autumn and escape on the longsword. They can't let the Covenant control the ring, but there's not much they can do besides blow it up. They retreat to the Pillar of Autumn, where Johnson and his remaining Marines stay with Silva, while Emil and Kat prepare the Autumn to blow it up. But first they have to fight through the flood that came to take the biomass of the dead on board. Meanwhile, Chief, having been teleported to the library, is quite different. Since Cortana knows what Spark plans to do with the Index, once she tells Chief, he confronts guilty Spark and decides to attack. He's not having very much success without a powerful weapon at his disposal, but he runs into several flood forms with rocket launchers and plasma weapons, after which he manages to stop guilty Spark, enough to force him to retreat and make repairs. Cortana thinks that it's best if they assume the crew of the Pillar of Autumn is all dead, and their best bet would be to take the Covenant cruiser and she can pilot it back to Reach and disguise herself in case any Covenant forces are still on there. Chief is concerned about bringing Flood back with them, at which point she taunts him, asking if he thinks he can't handle the Flood. This is ultimately meaningless, but I thought it was worth mentioning, since once they get out of the library, they can finally make contact once again with Keyes and the rest of the UNSC forces. Chief and Cortana get orders to take the Covenant cruiser since Kat has the codes needed to blow up the Autumn. Chief fights through the Covenant and Flood on board the Truth and Reconciliation, except this time around the Flood is far weaker. After having consumed less bodies, they're pretty evenly matched by the Covenant, and with throwing Master Chief into the mix, everything on board the ship is mass chaos. Once Chief makes it to the bridge of the Truth and Reconciliation, Captain Keyes has Kat set the Autumn to self-explode, while her and Emil head to the longsword to escape. With the reactors overloaded and set to explode, the rest of the Covenant forces in orbit are distracted from watching the Truth and Reconciliation and head to the bottom to try to stop the explosion. Along with 343, since he has been seeing what's happening, Emil and Kat end up having to fight off his Sentinels and Guilty Spark. But since Guilty Spark took longer to get there, the countdown was almost all the way done. Spark stopped it. Emil and Kat have to go back to the bridge, but Kat says she's the only one who can do it at this point. Emil doesn't have the tech know-how to set the ship to blow up. She heads to the bridge while Emil takes a Warthog to the longsword. Meanwhile, Chief is taking the Truth and Reconciliation out of orbit from Halo, with Cortana's help, while fighting off Flood and Covenant still on board. Once they are outside of Halo, she depressurizes the entire ship, having all of the Flood and Covenant forces on board asphyxiate, essentially defeating everyone on board except Chief. While the Flood could try to go into a dormant state, Cortana continues to scan the ship to make sure none can survive and hide. The forces on the longsword manage to just barely board and escape when Kat can't hold off the Flood anymore and blows up the Pillar of Autumn. Chief picks them up on the Truth and Reconciliation and they flee into slip space, dropping out at a random location to throw the Covenant off their trails. They hide out for 2 days until the Covenant return to the site of Installation 04's destruction, at which point they return to a few days late, only to find there's no one on Reach. Unlike the original where the Spartan oleoxygen-free signal was what drew them back to Reach, this time they don't. Back on early September, when B312 and the rest of the Spartan 2s assaulted the Covenant supercarrier Long Night of Solace, they planned to go through with Operation Red Flag, but instead found out about Unyielding Hierophant. For those of you who haven't read First Strike, Unyielding Hierophant was a Covenant command center of sorts that had over 500 Covenant ships for a secret navy built by the Prophet of Truth, containing mostly brutes, basically 99.99%, and was meant to betray the elites before the Covenant assaulted Earth. With the Spartans finding this out, they know Earth won't stand a chance if they don't get rid of this fleet somehow. The events of Halo First Strike happened just essentially the same way, except for instead of Master Chief, it's B312. And the one with the AI is Fred, with a copy of Cortana essentially, which we know from Halo Infinite to be the weapon. The crew has a strange time infiltrating the station, because while they are Covenant, no one is supposed to know of this secret fleet. After setting the reactors to overload and explode with the entire fleet on board, they're caught, forcing the Vice Admiral to once again sacrifice himself. While originally he uses this semi-small Ascendant Justice to hold off some of the brute ships so they can stay in the blast radius, this time he uses the Long Night of Solace, which ultimately means instead of a few brute ships escaping to report what happened, absolutely nothing makes it out alive. Except of course for the Spartans escaping on board a small corvette deployed by the Long Night of Solace. A corvette that's extremely heavily damaged after the siege on planet Reach, but it's at least capable of slip space travel. On board Unyielding Hierophant, Spartan Grace still dies, as even with 2 more Spartans there was very little way to avoid her death at a surprise attack from the Temple Brutes. She's the only Spartan slain here though. While some are injured, taking the Long Night of Solace, they're landing on Reach and fighting in between. There's plenty more of them alive than originally. With having Ackerson's data on planet Onyx, Halsey commandeers the ship, and instead of taking the corvette back to Earth, they head to Onyx to see what's going on. After reading some of Colonel Ackerson's reports about Reach, she figures this might be the best chance to save her Spartans. She concludes that Cortana and Chief probably did not make it, and it hurts her very much to leave John behind if he's still alive out there, but realizes it's either him or every last one of her Spartans. Chief is using his Covenant ship to get back to Earth in the meantime though. Meanwhile, we switch over to the events on High Charity. With Thel Vadamy's trial, the Prophet of Truth has no idea his fleet has been massacred by the Spartans. And so, he's not holding back on placing blame on Thel Vadam, as he strips him of the E suffix on his name, 1 to disrespect him and the Sangheli traditions, and 2 to vent his anger about the destruction of Halo. The elites are mad at Thel Vadam, but taking his name is something they will not forget. He's once more sentenced to become Arbiter, but this time, there's no heretic. Zeza Refumi did find the remains of the Oracle, aka Guilty Spark, but it was in such poor condition he did not get many answers out of it. The prophets brought it on board High Charity to keep it from deteriorating, but are reluctant to repair him. With them being the only ones who know the truth, that humans are the reclaimers, Truth and Mercy choose not to plug the Oracle into anything and have some Huragok tinker with him under heavy monitoring. On Earth, regret invades the planet, just the same as Halo 2. The events play out same to begin with, while there is no blue team here, so the remains of Noble Team team up with the remaining Spartan 3s to make up for the missions that blue team misses, aka Cuba, Antarctica, and the Yucatan Peninsula. Emil manages to regroup with June here. The major differences Our Key survived and therefore is given command of the In Amber Clad. Everything is the exact same for Chief until he kills the Prophet of Regret and gets glassed by the Covenant. Until he escapes into the waters of Delta Halo, Thel 'Vadam's first task is to head to Onyx where Xaitan Watinri's fleet went missing, which means he isn't on High Charity when they find out about the second Halo, and instead left behind. Thel 'Vadam finds the remains of the combined fleet of Righteous Purpose. He analyzes the few remains and pieces together what happened. On the surface, they found dozens of demons, and they held out the Covenant until they activated something that destroyed the entire planet into a fleet of small Forerunner weapons that obliterated them. He doesn't know what happened to those on the surface, but it's very evident what happened to Zaitan's fleet. His god's gifts were turned against them, but how did the humans gain control of Forerunner technology if they were unworthy? After thousands of years, the Covenant had only succeeded with Forerunner's gifts a handful of times. The Arbiter is floating in space around the remains when his screen goes from the vast darkness of space into a bright, artificial sun where he finds himself in a Dyson sphere. Obviously a Forerunner nature, he thinks back to the Prophet of Mercy asking him if when he saw a halo he was dumbstruck or awestruck, and thinks now would be an apt time to use those adjectives. As massive as the entire place is, he does get a signal he wants to check out. Before getting out of there to report back to High Charity, the ones that came along with him are all revering the place as if it was the Forerunner's home world itself, since they don't know exactly what the place is. After all, the Covenant were looking for a supermassive Forerunner world for millennia. Rataz Vadum and his forces plan to land on the ring in the meantime. Back on Delta Halo, since the Arbiter is on Onyx, or what was Onyx, he's replaced entirely with Tartarus and his forces. They suffer a lot of casualties to the Flood, but manage to push through to the Index, aka the sacred icon. But when they try to take it, it won't come off its place. They attempt to pull it out like Excalibur, but they find that the icon is not meant for them, and they aren't worthy to remove it from its resting place. They force the humans to get the Index, but only because Johnson doesn't want to have Miranda killed. She came on the mission as second in command of In Amber Clad, and came with Johnson because reasons. Just how in the original she had no reason to be there, here she doesn't either. But with Captain Keyes in command of the In Amber Clad, he manages to keep the Flood off board and evade them for the time being. The Gravemind launches an attack on them when they get to the Index though, trying to take the humans so no one can activate the rings. He slaps the other brutes away, but Tartarus jumps on top of one of the tentacles and tries killing it with his Fist of Rukt. He does destroy the tentacle, which frees up Miranda. She ends up running away since there's not much she can do against the cosmic horror Cthulhu-like monster that is the Gravemind. Ultimately hopping on the Pelican and attempting to escape back to the In Amber Clad. But the brutes that came with Tartarus capture her, along with the Index to go back to High Charity. After the first tentacle is destroyed, the Gravemind gets a much tighter hold and grip around Tartarus. Now, essentially we replace the Arbiter with Tartarus. He doesn't want to believe the Gravemind and the Monitor, but when the Gravemind brings out the Prophet of Regret, he gets really pissed off. He doesn't want to listen to reason. The Gravemind wants to use Tartarus against his own people, but not by simply infecting him. Instead, he proves the prophets are liars. He tells him the humans are the real children of his ancient enemy, the Forerunners, and that the prophets were only using them. To prove it, he shows him he can't infect Johnson. He literally tortures Johnson in front of Chief and Tartarus, at which Chief is getting more and more mad than Tartarus was when the Gravemind brought out the Prophet. Since all Flood biomass shares one shared consciousness, he knows Johnson is immune to the Flood, or at least was on Installation 04, due to his damaged nervous system from the Orion project, most commonly known as the Spartan 1 program. Once Tartarus sees Johnson is immune, he wonders how that's possible if when he saw dozens of infected humans, brutes and elites, and now even a prophet. Now believing the prophets have been lying or hiding something, he turns against them. Properly motivated by anger, Chief and Tartarus are released, and both are teleported to get the Index. Chief goes to the control room this time, however, as the Gravemind thought that if Tartarus believed them, he would not go along with the prophets and stop them, or at least slow them and weaken them. If he didn't believe them, then Master Chief would be there to stop him at the control room, even if the Gravemind himself has to intervene. Chief goes through eliminating the Covenant forces, mainly brutes. He's mad now, as Johnson wasn't teleported with him, so he can only imagine what the Flood may be doing to him. When he almost reaches the control room, he finds that the brutes are fighting against the elites, and that the brutes are also fighting amongst themselves. Back on High Charity, when Tartarus was teleported in the middle of the Prophet's speech, the Prophet declared he was infected. There must be no way he could have survived otherwise. Even though he tries to defend himself with words, he is met with plasma and needles. He teaches anyone in his path why he is the leader of the Jirahani. He's now convinced the prophets are liars that are hiding something big. He declares that anyone who follows the power of the chieftain of all brutes will be spared, but if they listen to the prophets, he will have no second thought in crushing them, thus starting the Great Schism. The bigger problem here is that not all of the brutes follow him, and while the replacement of the elites for the brutes in the honor guard makes some brutes more loyal to the prophets, it also made a lot of elites question the prophets. This doesn't manage to cause a great schism just like the elites did, it's more of the small schism. But things are hectic. Tartarus meets with his previous brutes, and while he doesn't convince them to join him, he does get the index and saves Miranda, insisting that she doesn't forget that, so the humans and brutes can form an alliance. Just then a Covenant corvette crashes into High Charity with flood forces. Miranda tells him first they need to get out of there alive. Tartarus takes Miranda with him to his ship, where they plan to rendezvous with the fleet heading back to Earth for the second siege of the human world. While the flood begins to spread through High Charity, Chief gets word from Captain Keyes that Miranda's signal jumped to slipspace and disappeared after a simple and short message, saying that the brutes are not their foes anymore and that she has the index. With this in mind, Chief wants to stay on Delta Halo to find Johnson. With the hundreds of Covenant ships in the sky above and not knowing where to even begin looking, Captain Keyes convinces him to go back to Earth. They had no guarantee that Johnson was still alive after all. He may be immune to the infection, but definitely not death. Chief receives direct orders and he stands down. He boards the In-Amber-clad and returns to Earth with the captain in the middle of the mini-schism happening nearby. It's not so much the revolt from the brutes that's causing the distraction, but the flood on High Charity. The forces of the Covenant, although very fractured, remain together for now. While trying to stop the spread of flood, the remaining prophets of truth and mercy set their plan on finding the human with the index by heading back to Earth. While Truth already knows about the portal to the Ark, he doesn't want anyone else to know the fleet currently on Earth is mainly brutes, and it would be a complete dead giveaway that he was planning to betray the elites. This is a problem twofold for him, because the elites want to head back to Earth immediately, believing they will crush the humans and the brutes and finally begin the great journey. But if they do hurry, the elites might find out Truth had already betrayed them. The Prophet's stall tactics are to remain around Delta Halo until all flood is vanquished. Meaning, on planet Onyx, the supercarrier inside the Dyson Sphere is having to contend with 24 demons with the help of some engineers. They have taken over the supercarrier almost the same way they took over the Long Night of Solace. In reality, they never stood a chance. The Arbiter and Rataz Vadun's forces thought they had reached their holy land, and they had let their guard down. They were defenseless, practically, when a rain of demons poured down on them. As some of the last forces on board, Rataz and the Arbiter refused to surrender, to give up. But the entire place is welcoming the humans like it's their long-lost home. There's a truth behind it they can't deny. Rataz still refuses to believe it, but after seeing firsthand what's happened, the Arbiter has come to terms with it. The prophets have lied, and they aren't the reclaimers. Rataz and the Arbiter are under surveillance, as the weapon believes Sangheili culture would have them end their own lives before being captured. With the now captured supercarrier, they once again think they can go through with Operation Red Flag. The weapon says there's no need. The Shadow of Intent is being recalled and given new orders to attack Earth, the human homeworld. With this, the Spartans and Halsey believe they've lost, but the weapon says she's not quite sure about that. The brutes seemingly align with the humans, which means there is a chance still, a small one at that, and with the supercarrier, they stand a slightly better chance. All in all, they decide that if the Covenant took heavy losses against the enemy they call the Flood, the brutes are with them, and it's Earth's last stand, they would rather be there than go along with Halsey's plan to stay in the Dyson Sphere and survive. They still haven't forgiven her for hijacking the weapon and the Long Night of Solace.
We're going to need a lot of luck to pull this off.
Vin approaches and takes off his helmet to reveal his half-melted face and what little the engineers could do for him.
We make our own luck.
After he says so, two things happen. Halsey remembers John telling her that and smiles, and the Arbiter stands up. He says he will fight with them, but only to silence the lies of the prophets and get out from underneath their control. His people have been used as pawns for too long. and they must be the masters of their own future. Ratas agrees internally, but doesn't want to show it in front of the Spartans. They plot a course for Earth and head through. While back on Earth, In Amberclad had just arrived, and the toils of war have been paid by Earth heavily. It looks like a huge battle took place, of course, but when Tartarus arrived with the human proclaiming an alliance, a few of his brutes rebelled, but the fighting stopped. Instead, they fought him, hand to hand, for the right to wield the Fist of Rook and become chieftain. But one after another failed. Even after taking on a dozen comers, being exhausted, the chieftain remained in control. Therefore, the alliance between the humans and brutes holds, with one major if. The brutes want half of the Forerunner technology discovered, and all of the Covenant technology if they defeat the prophets and elites. Lord Hood simply says, if. He isn't in any position to negotiate or turn down any help. Back with the Covenant fleet, High Charity had been lost, a monument to all their hubris. Believing they could stop the flood, the Covenant ends up having to blow up High Charity. At first, the prophets are completely against it, but once it's obvious the flood will either escape after making repairs or flat out beat them, they relent and give in. Effectively wiping out the flood on Delta Halo, thousands of the Covenant's forces hear one final echo through their minds.
Your plans were not your own. You were the tools of a caged and feeble mind.
This is all shy of confirmation that the prophets are playing all sides and have allegiance to none but their own. Yet the Covenant still remains as one. But without any more way to stall going to Earth, the prophets decide on launching a full assault on the human world with the rest of the fleet. The whole time, Truth had been waiting to hear from his fleet at Unyielding Hierophant and had sent a small but quick ship to investigate, only to find nothing but the remains of 1,000 ships. After learning he will have no backup, his strategy changed to go in as hard as they can and burn the human world down as soon as possible to get to the Ark. The less opportunity the elites have to find out the truth, the better. His plans are going accordingly so. As they arrive on Earth and the Covenant engages the Brute and Human Alliance fleet, the Covenant seems to be prevailing, even while on the offensive. Noble Team has been defending the orbital platforms. Now that the fight has moved to space, and Chief is busy boarding ships, infiltrating and blowing them up, when the Shadow of Intent arrives, the elites think the ship is on their side and don't shoot, thinking one more supercarrier should turn the battle in their favor just enough to completely wipe out the humans. But the Arbiter comes over the comms, explaining how the prophets have lied, how they kept the great Zaitan Watinri away, for fear he might learn the truth and take over the entire Covenant. The prophets claim he is a disgraced heretic, and most are inclined to believe them. That is, until Ratas takes control of the comms and says he too has seen the truth with his own eyes. The prophets only started this war for their own gain, to keep the power and bury their lies. The rings aren't meant for holy salvation, they're meant to wipe out the flood. With Ratas backing up Thelvatam, the fighting stops. Then it commences again, amongst the Covenant between the believers of the Great Journey and the elites. I'd like to mention also that some brute ships were still part of the Covenant, but most of them split off at this point. Some, from seeing the elites turn against the Covenant, just want to save their own hides, and some realizing they should have sided with Tartarus, but knowing he won't take them back, they flee, ultimately leaving the Covenant, the true believers defenseless against the fleets. The ships containing the prophets are spared. The Arbiter and Tartarus demanded it. The Brutes and Zenhili are ready to start a battle against one another, even while they're next to planet Earth. But Lord Hood interjects with a proposal. They can make peace and everyone can go about their separate ways. When Tartarus and the Arbiter ask how the human can possibly propose a fair treaty with the elites, he says that humanity will honor their side of the deal, and any Covenant ships and tech still on Earth will go to the Brutes, and they will split the Forerunner tech they find and unlock with them. The Arbiter thinks this is too much, but without being able to interject since the numbers had evened out more, he decides it's best if they just take the prophets and get out of there, and execute them on San Helios. Tartarus once more interrupts and gets greedy. He says since the Shadow of Intent is in possession of humans right now, that means that humanity have to give up that ship instead of giving it to the elites. Once again, war almost breaks out on the spot, with Ratas and Arbiter absolutely furious. B312 on board the supercarrier steps up and says,
How about a trade? The head of a prophet for a ship.
Tartarus slams his fist down. He laughs and turns to look at the Spartan.
I like this human. Deal.
The Arbiter looks at Ratas. He clearly doesn't want to give up either, as the death of the Prophet will mean something very important politically back on San Helios. But they all want the bloodshed to end, Without seeing any better options on the table, they make a treaty. They all get their own sectors of space. They can convene at Reach and at Onyx for any trade, negotiations, or anything of that nature that requires them to come together. Lord Hood marks that it's the most hesitant and shaky alliance he's ever been a part of, but he's glad the war is finally over. No longer does he have to sleep with one eye open for the first time in 30 years. If you've read the Halo comics or books, you know that even when the brutes are technically in a ceasefire, they really are always causing problems. So peace doesn't last very long, but war is not the option either party wants to go into. Tartarus is keeping tabs on the humans to make sure they fork over the share of Forerunner tech they find. He would have demanded it all, but they needed humans to operate them. So if he can grow his arsenal to be the biggest, so the elites can never be a threat to them again, he is content with keeping this alliance. Oni is fine with this as they are secretly uncovering Forerunner technology from other planets and keeping that to themselves, as well as finding out that the races of the Covenant were not ready for self-governance. This is a heavy point of conjecture in the books. After the Human Covenant War, humanity rapidly became the most powerful race in the galaxy, but not because they had the Infinity or new technology, but because the races in the Covenant had become very reliant on one another. So there is a lot of infighting amongst the brutes and elites. Surprisingly enough though, the brutes manage better than the elites. Senhili launched full-on civil war over the next few years, while the brute's more direct way is to challenge Tartarus for the Fist of Rook. He has to contend with anywhere from 1 to a dozen challenges every single day for the next few years. Humanity continues its sneaky BS, trying to dismantle the elites and brutes' governments by helping the rebels. But luckily, no one calls them out on it, since they aren't quite successful. This does, however, lead into several years of an uneasy peace. On the human front, there's a ton of Spartan 2s and 3s still alive that didn't usually make it, especially with the events of Onyx turning up very differently. But things are somewhat back to normal, with the Spartan 3s becoming trainers for the Force, and Emil and B312 go back to being headhunters, doing missions between hunting down insurrection leaders, pirate jackals, militia leaders, and this secretive faction that kept raiding all parties in the galaxy called the Banished. The UNSC stays busy. It's not until mid-2557 when the Infinity discovers Requiem, while transporting Blue Team on board, as they were designated to capture or kill Jul and Dama to form a more meaningful and lasting alliance with the elites behind the Brute's back. Except when they get there, the fight breaks out between Infinity and the Storm faction of the Covenant Remnants, just for them all to be pulled into Requiem. Here, I leave you all with a cliffhanger. I want to see if there's enough interest in this story to either continue it or let it be your headcanon. I'm adding this little bit after I finished editing the whole video. To some of you, it might feel like the video is rushed, and I'm sorry, the script was pretty lengthy, so I can't understand how it turned out to only 36 minutes. That being said, I do believe it's because of the way I told the story. Instead of focusing on individual events, I focused on the overall narrative. And if you guys prefer that, or prefer my regular style of focusing individually on what's happening, let me know. Thank you for watching. I gotta be honest, I've been putting off doing the Gears What If for almost 2 months, and that's what I want to do next, followed by another Stories in the Halo universe. You guys voted on a Flood story, so I just commissioned the art as of yesterday. In the meantime, I'll be getting more Gears of War footage, as well as writing more projects. Hope you all have a great night, Reclaimers, Gears, and Ivanicos. Ciao!